The car stopped abruptly in front of the door. Miss Bin, the creditor, appeared. As soon as she got out, she rushed straight to Han's door, banging loudly and repeatedly. The frantic banging startled Han. After a long, tiring day, night silently fell, darkness gradually enveloping the small house. The silence was so profound that only the chirping of insects in the garden could be heard. Han turned off the lights, gently closed the door, and prepared for a late sleep after all the hustle and bustle. But lying down, Han felt restless and uneasy. The events of the day came crashing down like silent waves, weighing heavily on her thin shoulders invisibly. She tossed and turned, her eyes wide open in the darkness. Though her body was exhausted, her mind couldn't fall asleep. Little did Han know that outside, in the thick darkness, there was someone who hadn't slept a wink. Dan stood silently in a dark corner, his eyes fixed on the small house. He feared that Miss Bin, Han's ex-husband's creditor, might hire someone to come back and harass them. If that really happened, how would Han and her mother cope in the dead of night? Thinking about it, Dan's heart tightened. It was these worst-case scenarios in his mind that kept him there, silently watching, even as the whole village was asleep. Time dragged on slowly. The clock showed just past 11 p.m. Everything remained silent. Perhaps all his worries were unnecessary. Dan sighed softly, reassuring himself. He wheeled his motorbike, preparing to leave to rest. But just then, a strange motorbike sound echoed from afar. The headlights shone directly towards Han's house, getting closer and closer, speeding through the darkness. Dan's heart pounded. He quickly hid in a secluded corner, holding his breath and watching. What Dan feared had finally come to pass. End of sentence. Late at night, with a young child inside, Han really didn't want to open the door. But the more silent she remained, the more aggressive Mrs. Bin became. Her harsh shouts, accompanied by loud banging on the door, shattered the fragile tranquility of the night. "If you don't open the door, I'll break it down." The threat rang out coldly. Reluctantly, Han tremblingly opened the door. Before she could say a word, Mrs. Bin lunged at her, grabbing and tearing at her, forcing her to pay her ex-husband's debt. All her anger and resentment were unleashed on Han. She believed Han had reported her to the police, and her rage intensified when she learned that Dan had personally come to her house. Knowing she was doing something wrong, Mrs. Bin wanted to settle the debt as quickly as possible, fearing that, the longer the night, the more complications might arise. In the distance, Don didn't rush out. He calmly pulled out his phone and quietly recorded the entire incident, from the threats to the physical assault. He waited for the right moment. When Mrs. Bin was about to retaliate because she couldn't collect the debt, Don emerged from the shadows and intervened just in time. But Mrs. Bin wasn't someone to be trifled with. She immediately threw herself to the ground, kneeling and wailing, making it clear that she was the victim in front of Don and Han. However, she didn't realize that everything had been recorded. Dan calmly opened the video. In an instant, Mrs. Bin's expression changed. The clear images of the assault were enough to bring her to justice. The cunning on her face quickly gave way to panic. With no other option, she turned and stormed away in anger. Before leaving, she pushed Dan down, uttered harsh words, and vowed to return to settle the matter. The car disappeared into the night. What remained on the porch was a heavy silence. Han was both frightened and surprised by Dan's timely arrival. She choked back tears as she thanked him. All the tension seemed to subside. Dan gently reassured her, promising to share the burdens weighing on her life. They sat silently by the door. The only things in the space were the tranquil night and two people burdened with unspoken worries. After reassuring Han, Don advised her to go to sleep, saying it was late and he would be home. The door closed softly. Han went back inside, hugged Tom, and tried to drift off to sleep. But Han didn't know. Dan had lied. In reality, he had silently remained on the cold steps all night, just to ensure that tonight no one would hurt her and her son again. As the rooster crowed at the edge of the village, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the old roof, illuminating the cold steps. Dan gently opened his eyes. His whole body ached after a long, sleepless night. He had sat there all night, silently keeping watch, not daring to close his eyes for even a moment. Realizing it was already morning, Dan breathed a sigh of relief. The whole night had finally been peaceful. No strange car noises, no suspicious figures, no further incidents. The worry in his heart slowly subsided, giving way to a feeling of weariness mixed with relief. Dan stood up and walked softly towards the door. Through the narrow crack, he quietly looked inside. Han was sleeping soundly, her face still bearing the marks of a night filled with haunting memories. Her breathing was even, a rare moment of peace after a series of turbulent days. Seeing her like that, Dan's heart softened. He understood that Han had been utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally. He couldn't bear to wake her. Dan stood there for a few more seconds, as if wanting to engrave that peaceful moment in his heart, then gently turned around. He walked outside, pushing his bicycle quietly so as not to make any noise. As the wheels rolled on the dirt road still damp with morning dew, Dan turned his head to look back at the small house one last time. The morning sunlight was casting a warm, gentle glow on the roof, like a silent promise that things would gradually get better. Dan turned his bicycle and left, carrying the fatigue of a sleepless night. But in his heart, there was a strange feeling relief and peace of mind, because at least this morning, Han and her child could wake up to a peaceful dawn. Returning home before dawn, Dan's eyes were dark and red from exhaustion. His whole body ached after a sleepless night of worrying about Han and her child, an exhaustion he hadn't even realized he was. He quickly drank a glass of cold water before collapsing onto his familiar old hammock. The hammock swayed gently, a breeze blew through the roof, and Dan drifted off to sleep without realizing it. Elsewhere, Han and little Tome had woken up early. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the crack in the door, illuminating the child's still sleepy face. The two of them were completely unaware that Dan had stayed up all night worrying about them. Han sat silently on the edge of her bed, a small, worn notebook in her hand. She flipped through the pages, filled with countless plans for their future: groceries, Tome's school fees, monthly debt payments. But the more she looked, the heavier her heart became. All the plans she had made were now falling apart. The notebook closed, and Han sighed softly. She didn't complain, only felt a lingering, silent sadness. Meanwhile, on Dan's side, he had only just fallen asleep when his mother hurriedly woke him. She stood by the hammock, looking at her son with a heavy heart. Dan's eyes were bloodshot, his face haggard, and he hadn't come home all night. Everything was too unusual. Anxiety mixed with curiosity made it impossible for her to remain silent. Dan, being honest, couldn't fool his mother's gaze. After a moment of hesitation, he recounted the whole story. Hun's suffering, the debt left behind by her ex-husband, the times he had been harassed and threatened. 50 million, that number echoed in the small house, heavy as a stone weighing on the listener's chest. Danja's mother fell silent. She understood. She saw in her son's eyes an undeniable concern, a quiet yet profound affection for Hun. Without saying much, she ran into the room and opened the old safe. With trembling hands, she took out her savings and placed them in Dan's hand. She spoke softly, but each word seemed to pierce his heart. "I'm helping Hun, also to atone for the mistakes I made against her in the past." Dan was stunned. He understood his mother's feelings, but reason wouldn't allow him to nod. As someone trained in law, Don knew that giving money like that was tantamount to aiding a criminal. He gently explained to his mother, word by word. Dan didn't accept the money, only softly saying, "Mother, trust me. I promise I will take care of Han in the right way." Dan's mother didn't press the matter further. She silently clasped her hands in prayer, hoping Han would be safe, hoping that good things would come to this woman who had suffered so much. Elsewhere, Han was still struggling to make ends meet. She climbed up each tamarind tree, the rough trunk stinging her hands. The fresh, sweet, and sour green tamarinds fell one by one into her basket. Han gritted her teeth, enduring the fatigue, hoping to earn enough money for meals and to care for little Tome. So much had happened, so many misfortunes had befallen her, but Han still chose optimism. She understood that life was like that. It didn't give anyone the right to escape, only the right to face. Soon, the basket was full. Drops of sweat rolled down Han's cheeks, mixing with the dust and the sun and wind. She left the familiar dirt road, intending to go to the market to sell. But just then, from a distance, a masked figure appeared. She didn't know when, but that person had been secretly following and watching her. A chill ran down Han's spine. Her intuition told her something was wrong. Without hesitation, Han quickly changed direction, pulling Tome along to run to Main's house nearby for safety. Her heart pounded, each step heavy with anxiety. Once inside the house, Han recounted everything to Main. But when they both turned to look, the figure had vanished, as if it had never existed. Main reassured her, "You must have been mistaken." Han only nodded dismissively, but her heart was completely uneasy. A feeling of unease clung to her thoughts. Finally, Han postponed her trip to the market, hugged Tom tightly, and hurried back home. The road ahead was still long, and the storms, it seemed, had no intention of letting go of her and her son.